The natural energy of a positive conversation can do wonders for our collective and individual flow state. The flow state is defined by the experience of being so absorbed by an engaging and enjoyable task, so much so that your attention is completely held by it. You genuinely lose your sense of time or self-consciousness or anything that isn't related to the task at hand. In a flow state, it is completely conceivable that you believe you can continue doing whatever it is, the task at hand, forever. Tim Bowie is a self-mastery coach who helps his clients level up when it comes to managing their self-mastery in any aspect of their life. The mission behind Bowie's work is to ensure that we can create a more compassionate, connected, and inspiring world. From a first principled basis, Bowie truly believes that no societal progress can be made unless we become more trusting, less divisive, and more connected. Bowie also says that our neurolinguistic programming plays a part in our overall quality of life and the way we view the world. Bowie joined me this week to have a comprehensive conversation on self-mastery, achieving a flow state, and how it can instantly improve every aspect of our lives from a personal and professional standpoint. It's a conversation with plenty of knowledge to share, so get a pen and a paper ready and jot down some important notes because my conversation with Bowie starts now. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Tim, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to learn all about your life and professional journey and how you help people really embrace the concept of being in a flow state. Great to see you this afternoon, and happy Friday to you, my friend.
Happy Friday to you, too. Thanks, Kevin.
Absolutely. So, Tim, as I told you before we started recording today, I find the work that you do extraordinarily fascinating to help create better humans by getting them in touch with their flow state, my friend. So I'm wondering if you can tell me about all the great work that you do.
Yes, of course. I'd be happy to. I think, to start this conversation, we just would be best served by talking about what flow is. And I think it's something that's innate within everybody. And it happens when we lose track of time, when things become effortless, when we lose track of ourselves. And what's important about it is that it happens when we're children all the time. In fact, from the ages of 0 to 7, it's constantly happening. It's not ever not happening. And then as we become more mature or adults, we start stressing out, or we have things that take us out of maybe a a state that's conducive for that. And that stress oftentimes takes us out of our own level of comfort, right? I mean, that's kind of what stress is. And so one of the things that I just try to bring people back to is just the sense of play. And, I describe it just in terms of like playing tag. Like, I don't know when the last time you played tag is, but I loved tag as a kid. And when you're playing tag, you're not thinking about, if you got bills due tomorrow, or I mean, like if you're really playing it, right? Like you're not thinking about like maybe the next podcast interview you have. You're just in that moment. If like they tag you, you tag them like right back, or like you're running away or whatever it is, right? And you're having fun. So that's, I think, the most basic sense of flow that most people can connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know that you work with people to avoid burnout and you use evidence based methodologies to do that. And Tim, I'm also curious to ask you about improving sort of your quality of life if you sort of get lost in the idea of having a conversation that moves the needle of progress forward. So, what do you think it means to have meaningful conversations to really move sort of our societal normal forward?
Yeah, there's a high correlation between happiness and fulfillment with the amount of time someone spends in flow. There's some studies that have been conducted in the past years that have basically show that the more time you spend in flow, the happier and more fulfilled you are. And so flow is a good measure of self-reported fulfillment. So some of the work that we do is, I mean, like one of the examples I think we can use is just like whenever somebody cuts you off when you're driving or something like that, or even if you're speaking, right, and somebody just cuts you off rudely. One of the things that happens is we immediately have a stress response, and sometimes that stress response is strong enough to take us into a fight or flight state. In that fight or flight state, we don't feel comfortable anymore, right? That's kind of the definition of it, and the breathing pattern changes, the heart rate changes, the brain patterns change, and when they change in a way that is pretty much domineering and takes over our current state, and we become either completely enamored with what's happening, that we lose sense of, we become the reactive self. And so when we're in the reactive self, it's very hard to be happy or fulfilled. And so it's more correlated with the state of, say, surviving versus the state of thriving. So what I do is I take clients on this journey. It's like a 10-hour, 6-week thing that we do where we just basically open up the avenues for the areas of life where there are a lot of deep, we can say like triggers, or we can say wounds that cause somebody to constantly flirt in and out of, say, like flow state, or say out of survival state, in and out of survival state. And so we do that at the root level, at the subconscious level. I also do, I have experience doing cognitive behavioral therapy and all different types of therapy, but the one I use the most and far by most is neurolinguistic programming. And there's a specific way that we do it so that we go to the root cause, so that we can get people back in touch with that sense of flow, that sense of play, that sense of passion, that sense of connectivity, where everything can come together and create this creative expression of who we are without the limitations of the baggage that we bring.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into the programming from a neurolinguistic point of view, my friend. And really, how do we get down to the nuts and bolts of our programming in our lives that are sort of causing us stress and anxiety, and how do we reverse that so that we can be in a more flow or more happier state?
That's a great question, Kevin. One of the things that I usually do is a type of meditation where it's what we can almost say is like a induction into hypnosis, where we access the subconscious mind. Because everything stems from that root level, the subconscious level. So one example I can give you is when you you buy a car, maybe you buy a red car, or you buy like, I don't know, a Toyota Prius. The next thing you know, every other car on the road you notice is like either red or it's the Prius. And you're like, yo, everybody drives a Prius now. So there's something like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's actually linked to something we call the reticular activating system. And it's a system that is responsible for sort of bringing to the forefront of the mind a sense of salience, or what is important to you, from the background to the foreground. Because like right now in this moment, you know, of the question you've asked, and like of a million things I can bring up, there's something that's most salient that I bring to this conversation, right? And so there's this constant process that our brain does to bring something from the background to the foreground. And that comes from the subconscious, the unconscious mind. And so one of the things that we would do is we would just take you through a hypnotic induction or something like a meditation, some breathing. And then we would basically do some work around like what sort of negative emotions or limiting beliefs that you have around a certain thing that so let's say we're going to do some work with you on, I don't know, what would you want to do some work on? Like, would you want to do some work on like growth in like spirituality, relationships, your work, money? What would it be for you?
Tim, I am a firm believer in the power of social capital and building relationships. We often hear the term strength in numbers in sports, and for me, it's building social capital through relationships as well.
So if we wanted to to make this, I guess, practical, right? Like if you ask me a question like, well, how do we get down to the nuts and bolts of it? I can get you the conceptual. The conceptual is basically we have these little interrupters that come up, right? And so like we have this conscious mind, and then we have the subconscious mind. Everything stems from the subconscious mind. Everything we experience is just a construct. It's a representation of what is, right? Because like even though like I can touch this computer in front of me, or I can touch the mouse, or I can touch this microphone or whatever, it's just it's a confabulation of like the five senses basically. And so within those there's little viruses in the data that we get, and sometimes the data is like something as simple as I like this or I don't like that. And when you have like I like this and I don't like that, it kind of takes you away from what is. The what is the flow. And so anything that takes you away from the what is, like it, like you hear somebody's voice and you're like, oh, I don't like that, or you create this judgment, you create this noise. It's kind of like when you watch, we talked about sports earlier. So like if you watch like the NBA, right, and you're watching them play, the commentators, they have no effect on the game, right? Like they're just talking and then they're arguing with each other. They got their point of view. This is ESPN commentator has his point of view, and then they're talking, they're speculating, but it has no actual bearing on the game itself, right? Even the players, whatever they're thinking in their head, almost has no bearing on the game itself. Like the game itself is played in the moment, right? And so all this stuff on top of that is abstraction. It's all noise. And so what we're doing is we're just doing our best to remove all the noise so we can get to what is. And that what is the purity of that moment. And that purity of the moment has everything inside of it that's self-contained. And it has the essence for everything as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm fascinated to ask you, how do you define the concept of resilience? How do you think that should be sort of defined and looked at from a broader perspective? So how do you define resilience?
It's a great question. As resilience, I think, it has a connection to hormesis, or this idea that whatever you come into contact with makes you stronger. And so I think that's the best form of resilience. There's a type of resilience where it's like you just have this grit, you have this perseverance where something happens and you can just kind of go with it and bear through and get to the other side. But I think the strongest kind is the kind where you get a stress response and somehow that makes you stronger. A lot of plants, like when you go to the grocery store, you want to get like the most green plant or whatever, but like that plant hasn't been stressed. And so like there's no there's no there's no reactive properties within that plant that have that they, when you eat it, that you'll get something that will yield like this anti-inflammatory response. And so I think it's like the trials and tribulations that make us stronger, and I think that's the connection between this idea of like resilience, this idea of hormesis. It's sort of like I think it's Rogue, right, from X-Men. Like she can touch anybody, and then she can take on their superpower, right? And I think that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And, reading up on your story, Tim, I know that you had your first sort of transcendent experience at the age of 13, and since then you've been lucky enough to work with some of the greatest Buddhist masters of our current time. So tell me about that experience and your own experience of growth. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. Yeah, that experience happened, and it's quite a hard experience to explain, but I'll do my best. I had this idea that I wanted to meditate. I don't know how I got curious. Uh, and so I just went on Google and I looked up how to meditate. And within a few sessions, I got to this point of what I would call the point of stillness, where the mind was completely still, almost like you drop a drop into a body of water, and that ripple moves out and then just freezes. It's sort of like that. There's just a moment when everything is completely still. And I had this internal experience where it was almost like I was outside of time, but the reality, the gravity of that experience was more real than the experience that I'm having in this waking state with my eyes open, having this conversation with you. It was so real that, it was an out of body experience. So it was so real that like I felt like I was talking to God basically. And it was what ended up being like 3 hours, but it felt like, 10, 15 minutes. And so when I had that experience, I knew from my own direct experience that, not because I read it from a book, not because I heard it from somebody else, but because I experienced it myself, that there's something more to life than just what meets the eye and what we're told and what we experience. So that began this sort of journey of inquiry or seeking of the truth of what really is. And that's how I, went down this path of studying. I went, in college. I studied all the religions. Talks with all the missionaries and the pastors and the priests, and I was really curious, and I wanted to know what people thought was the answer for them and their experience of that. And so um, I was lucky enough to be introduced to a really great master who basically showed me the essence of flow through his own way, his own teaching. And then so I learned that, and I learned many different forms of meditation, of the sutras, or the equivalent of the Bible study, um, and tantras and yogas and things like that as well. So they're all really fundamental to what I do and how I package it within uh, the programming that I use to help other people through the neurolinguistic programming as a vehicle to help people access that inner state of bliss or tranquility.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Tim, I'm a firm believer in finding what I call our inner center. And what I mean by that is when everything collapses in your life, I think it's always important about no matter what's going on in your life, and you have to sort of reconnect with yourself to sort of ground yourself. I think it's important to find our inner center when everything else in our life is sort of demanding our time and attention. So I'm curious to ask you about the importance importance of finding your inner center from a mental and emotional standpoint, and how important do you think that is?
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what or to learn what your process is for finding your inner center. But I'll answer your question. The I think the importance of it comes from developing a sensitivity for when you are outside of that inner center. I think for me, that's the most important thing to figure out and work on because it's easy. I think it's not too hard to find that inner center for me personally, and I think for other people as well. Is there you have some sort of practice that takes you there. The only thing is sometimes we're outside of it before we know it, and the next thing before we know it, we're having a very dissatisfactory experience with life or with another person, or whatever, with work or whatever. And so I think the key is how do we how do we get there and how do we grow it and expand it to a way that we never really leave it? I think that would be the ideal.
Yeah, and I'll answer your answer with an answer that you wanted from me in the spirit of fairness. For me, Tim, when everything else sort of uh, collapses in life, for a lack of a better term, and I don't like the word collapse, but for when everything else sort of is on fire in my life, I am a big believer in the power of self-reflection and having conversations of growth with other people and myself and learning from experiences. Having conversations on a podcast is big for me because, I was born with cerebral palsy, so sometimes it's not always easy for me to get outside and sort of uh, fill my inner cup with the emotional energy that I need. So having conversations like this one through podcasting, whether it's through online networking. So I find my inner center most when we talk about the power of networking, because Tim, I think that networking, and life are interconnected because in my view, that life is a constant game of networking. So, to answer your question, it's a roundabout way to tell you that I value networking and the value of conversation because I think those are two powerful tools, and I'd love to get your thoughts on those two things as well.
Yeah, there are in the way that I experience flow, 5 ways to experience flow. And one of those ways is socially. So there's a social flow, and you can call that like group flow, or you can call that conversational flow. There's a way that when two people connect, or even a group connects, there's sort of a new identity that's the spirit of that group or the spirit of that conversation. And when you're truly connected to that, you're not really thinking about like how you're showing up or how you're looking, or like if you have this pimple on your head or anything like that. You're just lost in the conversation. You're lost in the greatness of the spirit of that group. And so I definitely think that there's something to connecting into somebody else or a group that expands your consciousness into the the vastness of that group or of that other person. And I think that is a really good way of breaking out of the sort of limited states that we exist in when we're by ourselves, especially if we're uh, thinking or reflecting on what's going on in our lives or what's not going well and things like that. When you talk to somebody, I think it helps to open up those zones of what else might be out there, what else might be going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, something that just popped in my head, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on, are the societal pressures of living up to expectations and how getting into a flow state can help with that. Because if you consume too much negative energy or negative information from the sometimes, it clouds our better judgment. So how do you think dealing with the societal pressures of today can be better addressed if people really adopt the idea of really getting into the middle of their programming from a linguistic point of view at the flow stage? So how important is it for, I guess, for lack of a better term, for people to block out the noise when they're looking to find their inner prosperity? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's a really solid question, and I think that really gets the root of what we're talking about. And so that is that you really have to define yourself outside of how society. You have to extricate yourself. You have to free yourself from, I don't know, let's call it the matrix. I'm not a huge fan of that word, but it's hard to, like, society exists for itself. Everything exists for in and for itself, right? So the reason why you have societies, it's this, we call it, it's been called a leviathan, right? It's this thing that we give power to because it can give power to all, like we call civilization, right? So it exists in and for itself, and its best interest is not necessarily your best interest. And so there's a fine line we have to dance or walk along, where we need to figure out, like, how do we uniquely fit in society without society defining entirely who we are. And I think that's just this journey of this dark night of the soul that some people talk about, or self-discovery, where you're born into society. You're born into these expectations. Maybe your parents have, maybe your teachers had, your friends have, your siblings have, your family members have, and you take those on unknowingly. um, but there's a part of that that's meant to serve you, and there's a part of that that doesn't serve you, and figuring out what doesn't serve you is really key to being to extricate yourself from this outside pressure, right, of being compared to with other people, or comparing yourself to other people, or figuring out how even something as simple as how to make money. It's, you go to college and you think, you get this degree and you're going to get this job and you're going to be set for it until you retire. That's just not really how it works. I think that the first principle of value, and I think that's what we're talking about here, is value, is how do you naturally, what area do you naturally have and thrive in, that you naturally create value in, right? So for some people, that's like their natural values. They're very observant, so, and they're humorous, and they're that makes them a comedian. They go practice that art, that craft, and they get to a point where people are willing to pay to see them, right? So, like, there's this little dance that we have to have of, like, what really fills you up, what really lights you up, and that is a clue of what your superpower is. And I think when we can take in that information and figure out what our superpowers are, because society will not tell you what your superpowers are. Only you can discover that for within yourself through these trials, or these, experiences of hormesis that we have, that sort of transform who we are. And so, when we do have these experiences of flow, I think it's a good entry point to figure out what really excites us, what really drives us, and go in that direction. So we can find that value that we have within ourselves, that we can give and offer to society, in which they can reward us for, in a way that's, I can't think of the word right now, but in a way that's very worthwhile, I could say.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, I know that you have a background in martial arts, and one of the ways you describe yourself as being a serial entrepreneur. So I'm curious, how do you think your martial arts training and your passion for business are interconnected, and how do you think they've helped you to grow as an individual?
Kevin, I will have to say that I love your questions. And of all the podcasts I've been on, I think I love your questions. Probably they're up there. So thank you for your questions.
You're
The
welcome. You're fascinating person. So I'm glad the power of research paid off, right?
Yeah, I think it's also just maybe a just how your brain works. Maybe this is your gift. This is your superpower. But let me answer your question. So your question is martial arts and business, and so for me, they're linked in this way that you can sit there and you can hypothesize about something, or you can say that this way is the best way, and then you can go out in the street and you can get beat up, right? So it's like the reality is outside of you, right? Like uh, in a very conventional way. I mean, in the ultimate way, when we're talking about like reality in the quantum sense, and that's not true. But I think in the conventional way, I'm not going to get too far into the weeds on that. But uh, you have an idea and you can test it, and you can get better through testing it, but also it grounds you and it humbles you in reality, right? So in business, you can have this idea and you can think it's so great and you can tell all your friends, and then you launch it and it falls on its face, or you launch it and it's completely successful. And so the merit of an idea, whether that's in business or whether that's in martial arts, is grounded in practicality. And that practicality serves as this feedback loop. And I think it's a very important thing to identify what the feedback loops are for us in our lives when it comes to things that are important for us. So like if our whole life is based on education or whatever, it's like, what is the feedback loop for that? Like, how do we know that this is actually making a difference for us or for other people or whatever our values are? And so with martial arts, you have a feedback loop. I can train to say like 10,000 kicks, or I can train like one kick 10,000 times, and I can have a feedback loop, which way is better. And I can go out there and I can spar with people, and I can figure out like, have I been putting in the work? Is this kind of work that I'm putting in effective? Same thing with business. So I just like that the proof is in the pudding in those two disciplines, and any discipline really, but in those two especially.
Yeah, and in the 10 or so minutes I have left with you there, Tim, I'm curious to ask you, why do you think people make life harder on themselves than they really have to? And I know for you, fitness is a big part of your life. So tell me about how people can really make the concept of living life a little bit easier, and how incorporating fitness can really improve that quality of life.
Mhm. Yeah, so the we can use fitness as a vehicle for understanding for this idea to most elegantly answer your question. Let's say your goal is to lose 5 pounds. And I think a lot of people have this relationship with this thing, quote unquote, hard work, where they want something, but they think that they have to put in hard work to get it. And I think if you have this relationship with something where it's going to be hard from the start, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. If it's not enjoyable, it's probably not going to be sustainable. And so I think that's why a lot of people, they lose weight and then they go back up, and it's maybe they'll gain some more weight too, because there's a level of exertion when it comes to discipline, when it comes to will. And if we have a relationship with something where it's hard, then it requires that discipline, it requires that will. And we have a finite amount. And then once we lose that, it's sort of like when we look at the situations where people burn out at work, and there's only so much you can take. And then after that, you just kind of let go. And when you let go, that's when everything just, all all hits the fan, let's just say. And so, like, it's a simple question. It's like, well, how can I make this easy? How can I make this fun? And that's really like that is the essence of it. It's like, if you want to lose 5 pounds, how do you make it easy? How do you make it fun? And that's going to be a sustainable way. So we can use fitness as an example. Well, how can I make it fun? Well, maybe if you work out with people, maybe if you have somebody that you pay and they show up and you just work out together, or they pick you up and you go to the gym together. Like, just make it fun. And you track your food, right? So it's like, how do I make this easy? How do I make this fun? And maybe it's just like, I'm just gonna cut out like one thing a week, and then we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll cut out chocolate, or like chocolate milk or ice cream for like for this week. We'll see how it goes. And it's just an experiment. You just make it easy, you make it fun, you make it light, you make it playful, and that way you can go down this journey without putting on all this additional stress of like, oh, I got to eat broccoli and chicken for 6 weeks until I lose 5 pounds and whatever. And it's just like, it makes it very, very distasteful as a journey. So it's just not one that people are likely to commit to.
Yeah, absolutely. And to very quickly tell me when you look at my final question for you is when you look at your life and legacy, my friend, how do you think you want that to be defined?
Mm, I just want to facilitate the greatest change possible for people, for society, for the civilization. And I look at the emergence of technology and how it's affecting our way of living, and that we are ill equipped to deal with the emergence of technology at the rate that it's coming out at. So if we can look at something like nuclear power and nuclear weapons, we see, we dropped two bombs on Japan, and that has irreversible effects on the environment, on the people. And now we have, 50 countries with nuclear weapons that can all do the same at any time. And another example is we have AI. So we have all this infinite leverage, right? This lever that we can pull, that we can basically bring almost probably everybody out of poverty with limited amount of investing in terms of education or anything like that. I mean, if you can write the English language, then read or write the English language, then you could learn from AI. You can use AI. You can build a business from AI. So we're living in this very interesting time where there's just this massive shifts in technology, almost like every day, almost every week. Realistically, most people see it maybe every quarter or something like that. But it's, if you're really in it, you see it like every day, every week. And people are just not at the level of awareness within themselves to really take advantage of these opportunities. And part of that is because they make things hard on themselves. Part of that is because they have this baggage that they don't know how to get rid of. And part of that is because they exist in a state that is not in a free flowing state. And so it's a very us versus them type of mentality. If you get this, and that means I can't get this. And so that means I need it better. I need to beat you out and all this other stuff. And, I think that's the past world that we lived in. The world that we live in now is more of an infinite sum games. It's more of a positive sum game. And what I mean by that is all of us inherently bring value. And with these tools and these resources, with this technology, we can leverage the value that we bring so that there are more parts in the pie, more pieces of the pie, then it becomes an infinite pie. And with the technology that we have, I think the only thing that's left is to kind of remove the mental barriers that we have on ourselves and that have been placed on us by, maybe society or the ways that we've grown up or the traumas that we've had or the triggers. So I'm just building a training company that will, have a global reach, that we can train people, internationally to just remove these limitations on themselves so that they can create this world where people can collaborate. There's no fear of this sort of, us versus them or anything like that, but it's more like, how can we collaborate? How can we bring out more innovation, more ingenuity? Because that's where ingenuity and innovation comes from, is from collaboration. If you look at, I don't know, examples of flight, we had the General, Howard Hughes versus the Wright brothers. And, most people don't know who General Howard Hughes is, but he was, paid the most by the government. He had the best scientists, the best team, but he did not figure out how to fly, and nobody knows his name. Versus the people who were really passionate about it and they just wanted to figure out, they had limited budget, but they went ahead and, they figured out how to fly. And I think it's just that level of commitment, of passion, of collaboration that leads to these like leaps and bounds of innovation that can really change the quality of everybody's life. And so I just want to facilitate that process in any way that I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And quickly, Tim, tell me if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Probably through my Instagram would be the best way right now. I have a website as well, and Instagram is just instagram.com/Tim Bin Bowie, which is TIM as in Michael, DIN as in November, H as in hotel, and Bowie is B as in Bravo, UI. So Tim Bin Bowie.
Fantastic. Well, Tim, I really want to thank you for ending your week and spending some time with me to talk about flow state life, spirituality, and everything in between, my friend. You work in the space. And time on my behalf. It's most appreciated. I want to wish you a good weekend. And thank you so very much for being here. It's most appreciated.
You're a great man, Kevin. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Thanks for having me.